Reddit, the front page of the internet, an online bulletin board where you can find any and all stories, books, movies, fitness, the paranormal. So here's 44 stories taken from the darkest corner from the internet's front page. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights because this is gonna be a long one. 44 Reddit ghost stories you've probably never heard before. Boy in my car. I don't believe in ghosts, but I still will never be able to explain what happened that night. I was at a bonfire with my friends. We regularly did this because we lived in the middle of nowhere, and I guess setting shit on fire in a friend's yard was a good way to spend an evening. I was the only guy at this bonfire who was planning to stay the night, and the rules was that the guys sleep in the basement. That night, my friend Stephanie talked about the ghosts in the basement to her home. I'm 17 or 18 at this point and really only listen for the joy of a good ghost story. She tells me how they would wake up and see a boy and a girl over her bed regularly for the first year that she lived in that house and that they were apparently killed there. The thoughts of kids actually dying in that house chilled me to the bone. That's when I decided I wouldn't be staying the night. I just felt uneasy at the thought of staying there alone. I really couldn't explain why. Stephanie's house has a large driveway, and with the get-together, it was packed with 5 or 6 cars. On my way out, I heard what sounded like footsteps going around the other cars. They would just start and stop, like someone was trying to hide. They were light too, like a child running around playing a game or something. But it was past midnight and there weren't any kids in the house. I shook it off and left. The entire car ride home wasn't easy. If you've ever felt like you weren't alone, like someone was hiding and you just couldn't see them, it was like that but in a small car. Every time I tapped on my brakes because it would light up the back of my car and I would just look behind me and see nothing. It never made me feel any better though. Nearing the subdivision I turn onto to get to my house, I hear a light cough. It sounded exactly like a child. My heart sank and I seriously thought I was going to die or something. When I hit the brakes to turn, I saw him. A little boy just sitting in the back seat of my car, smiling. I basically drove my muscle memory alone because I couldn't take my eye off him. My house was the first in the subdivision, so I immediately turned into my driveway and ran out. The entire time, the kid was still sitting there staring at me. My mother was still up, and she wanted to know why I didn't pull her car in the driveway like I was supposed to. I told her I had to go to the bathroom very badly because that would be more believable than there's a ghost boy in my car and I'm scared. I eventually go back out to my car and pull it in and the kid is gone. I was still scared, but I didn't think I would see him again, and I didn't. I told my friend about that the next day over the phone. What she said freaks me out to this day. I made it up, she told me. She shrugged it off as me being paranoid. But I knew what I saw, clear as day. I don't know what or who that kid was, and I don't want to find out. Whatever it was, when he smiled at me, it wasn't a friendly smile. I still have nightmares. Black figure in reflections. For a little over 2 months, I've been seeing a black figure standing about 6'2" in the reflections in my house, usually standing 2 to 3 yards behind me. Accompanying this has been chronic nightmares, fatigue, insomnia, and paranoia. Until tonight, it's been really calm. An occasional appliance turning on out of nowhere, noises, shit like that. Tonight, however, music came from nowhere. The first lyric was, "Your time is up." The entire song was about murder, so I burnt a combination of sage and rosemary as well as salting the windows and entryways to the room in which I sleep. I have a friend who's more experienced in the matter coming to my house tomorrow, but this thing is definitely bad. especially given the song from earlier. Any ideas on what this might be? My uncle's Southern Belle. My uncle's been a truck driver for 38 years. Since he's single and always on the road, he'll move from place to place as it suits him, often renting a house for a place to sleep while he's not driving. He often said that he spent more time on the road than in his house and thus never really felt attached to a place. During the middle of his career, he bought a small home just north of Richmond, Virginia, that was nearby an old Civil War battlefield. While he's living there, he notices a haunt that would make herself known and then move on. He never spent a lot of time there, so didn't pay it much attention and decided he would simply share the place since it was hers first. He described her as a Southern Belle kind of girl whom he called Isabel. He believes that she gave him that name, but said that she always looked like that she was going to a party. Anyways, one day he's driving out near Kentucky for a haul when he pulls over to take a rest in his sleeper. He wakes up to someone touching him beneath his blanket in an uncomfortable place. For anyone who lives alone will tell you that that can be alarming. He wakes up and there's Isabel, staring down at him, still dressed for a party. He says she gives him the kind of look that says he won't ever see her again and then disappears. Says that he never saw her again either and just thought she wanted to hitch a ride to Kentucky. Funny thing was, he said he missed her and hopes she's doing well, wherever she is. Unexplained activity in new apartment. Hi there. My husband and I just recently moved into our first apartment in August. We were just married in July. We live in a very rural area of upstate New York, and our apartment sits on top of our landlord's garage. Our landlord owns a natural gas drilling company and refurnished the second floor of his large storage garage into our apartment. My mom is a really crafty and, as a wedding gift to us, she refurnished a small end table she bought from an antique store. I loved it. It's my favorite piece of furniture that we own, and I put a framed picture of my husband and I on our wedding day, as well as my bouquet in a vase on the table, and set the table along the wall in our hallway, directly under a small sign with some cheesy saying on it my aunt gifted us. The table is directly under this sign. My husband and I both work days. We leave at the same time every morning, but I come home about 2 hours before he does every day. For the first few weeks in the apartment, I didn't really notice anything, other than a sort of uneasy feeling I have sometimes when I'm alone in the apartment. Then I started to notice that the end table was in the wrong place, pushed a few feet to the left, so that it nearly touched the entrance of our bathroom. No big deal, I just figured I'd moved it cleaning or that my husband had shifted it for whatever reason and forgot to replace it. Like I said, I always keep it directly under a sign that hangs in the hallway. After having to move the table back twice in 1 week, I asked my husband if he had been moving the table. He said he hadn't touched the table and suggested perhaps that I had nudged it while cleaning or moving boxes or something. This to me seems unlikely because, like I mentioned, I have a collection of small decorative things I keep on the table, and being an antique with only 3 legs, it's kind of uneven, so if I'm mopping and need to get under it, I have to physically pick up the table and move it or risk tipping everything on it over. I shrugged this off, but I mentioned it to my best friend at work. She suggested that I do a smudging of the apartment to clean out any residual energy. She's kinda spiritual, and she insists that if I smudge the apartment, the table will stop moving and the uneasiness that I feel in the apartment will stop. She gives me a smudge stick and instructions. I smudged the house following her instructions about a month ago. Like she said, I immediately felt less uneasy being alone in the apartment, and the table stopped moving entirely. It would be exactly where I left it, directly under the sign in the hallway every day. For a solid month, the table stayed put, but the uneasiness returned, and built to a point where I am now feeling completely anxious in the apartment alone. It's gone to the point where when my husband spent a couple days visiting his parents last week, I had to stay with my parents because the idea of spending 2 nights alone in the apartment gave me so much anxiety. My mom had recently had some health problems and has been feeling kinda down, so yesterday I took a vacation day from work and took her shopping. When I came home in the afternoon, the table had moved more than I had ever seen it move, almost parallel with the door itself. I took some pictures and can upload them if that helps. I'm getting really desperate. I'm in really desperate need of some advice about the situation. I honestly have no idea what's going on and why. My husband and I are getting seriously weirded out about it, and it's really unsettling to me. I've started sleeping with the hall light on. Any advice you guys could give us is so much appreciated. The Creature and the Deer. I walk on train tracks near my property for walnuts, and at times I pick up deer skeletons to make bone meal. One day a few years ago, I was walking and I got this heart-stopping fear that stopped me in my tracks. I decided to stop to see what could have caused that sort of response. I didn't see it at first, but ahead of me, sitting next to the tracks, was an extremely thin but tall humanoid creature. It had its back partially towards me, but it was doing something with its arm. I stepped as quietly as possible off the tracks and into a drainage ditch so I could back out without being seen. When I did, I saw it was poking at a dead deer with really long fingers. To this day, I still have no idea what the hell it was. Everyone I've told has called me a liar. The beautiful singing upstairs. Okay, here goes. I moved to South California in the mid-1990s after a brief and unsuccessful stint in college. Without a place to stay and basically all of my belongings in my car, the best move was to slum with my grandparents while I figured out my next move. When I arrived, nobody was home and I was beat from the drive, coming from Wisconsin. I just flopped onto the couch for a quick nap and that's when I heard it. Singing. A beautiful voice. A woman's voice. I immediately thought it was the TV or music from a neighbor's house. After a thorough search, no radios or TVs were inside the house or out. But the hauntingly beautiful singing persisted for quite a while until it stopped, just as suddenly as it has started. But wait, there's much more. I confronted my aunt about it, and she had had the same experience on a number of occasions. Now I'll say this, I'm a believer in ghosts, but I'm not one to attribute every little noise to be supernatural. I'm pretty level-headed and, for the record, I went back to school and got my degree. That said, this house was fucking haunted. Some little things, the feelings of being watched, sudden and dramatic hair-raising chills up your spine without rhythm or reason, footsteps, and my personal favorite, whispering in your ear at bedtime. Yeah, I would lay down to sleep in a room that I had later found was a scene of a suicide, and quite often, something would whisper in my ear. I would jump out of bed, check for TVs or other sound sources, and without fail, could never explain it. I remember all of this like it was yesterday because it was all so vivid. I eventually started running a mom and pop Italian restaurant, so I worked long hours. While I eventually got my own place, I would sometimes invite some of my pals to come over for beers and pizzas after work. I'll never forget the night that we had all an experience together. We were sitting in the den on 2 different sofas, and they were both situated so I was facing them but had a clear view to the hallway leading to the bedroom. We were all playing Madden football and were having fun when both of them stopped and looked down the hall, and then looked back at me, then at each other. Sure enough, footsteps, but nobody to attribute them to, and that was the last time they came over. It was the kind of place that made you want to sleep with the light on. I don't think that the spirit or spirits intended harm, but they wanted to be known, and they were. For the record, that was the only time I've ever experienced things I couldn't explain. I'll never forget it. I fully believe that I lived in a very haunted house. You know he's still here. For a few years, I've been having a reoccurring nightmare. It's usually the same every time. I'm lying on my right side, and I'm drifting in and out of sleep. I see a background light coming from my doorway that leads to the kitchen. There's a loud buzzing sound, and I close my eyes again. The buzzing gets louder, and I open my eyes to see a dark, cloaked figure standing in the doorway. I try to move, and my whole body is paralyzed. The figure never moves. It just sways back and forth. It stays like this for a while as I try to move. After a while, I get movement back in my neck and my hands and force myself out of bed. The last time this happened a few nights ago, same situation. Except, I hear a high-pitched laughter. I can't move but slowly begin to rotate my head to see a little girl dressed in a plaid overcoat and a hat. She's about 8 years old, and she's sitting on top of my bookcase in my room that's about 6 feet tall. She says, "You know he's still over there, and there's nothing I can do to help you." I still can't move, and she starts mumbling some random things. I rotate my head back towards the door, and the cloaked figure is standing closer to me, but he doesn't move. "See? He's still there," she says. Then the buzzing stops and I start moving again. At this point, I can't remember if I was awake or if I was dreaming this. The woman with no face. I once awoke in the wee hours to a woman in a puffy service dress leaning over me, wearing a headdress that suggested either nun or Muslim. She had no face. It looked exactly like it had been smudged out with a smudge tool in Photoshop. The previous day, someone returned from Egypt and brought me a statue of Bastet that's covered in hieroglyphics. I don't see a connection, but that's the only thing out of the ordinary that I can think of. She keeps getting closer. Oh, where to start? Well, the scariest probably happened when I was about 20. Several weeks a night, I would sleep over at my boyfriend's house. One night, we were watching a movie and he happened to fall asleep on the couch. I get up to go to bed. It's in the very next room. For reference, the bed is facing the door, so when I lay down, you can look out into the other room. I got ready for bed, and as soon as I got under the covers, there's a woman standing in the doorway. She was wearing early 1900s dress with her hair in a bun. I can still picture her face even now, and this is nearly 10 years ago. Scared, of course, I pulled the covers over my head. After what felt like forever, maybe 5 minutes after, I lifted the covers. She was a good 10 feet into the room now. Cover up again. Then I peek again. She's at the end of the bed. After I cover up again, all of a sudden I feel like there's a mount of rocks on my chest, and I can't breathe. I pull the covers back while still laying down, and this woman is sitting on my chest. I'm absolutely terrified. I start patting the bed to call his dog up. The dog comes up, but it's no help. The Sunday school prayer sent whatever that woman was on her way. I mentioned it to him the next morning. Apparently, I wasn't the only one to see her. He took me into his office and showed me a photo of his grandmother. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was her. After that, I never went any further inside his house than the garage. Ghost with loose burned skin hanging off. So, I'm a Reddit noob, and this is the first time I've ever used it. Not sure if I'm doing this right or not. This is an incident that happened with my best friend who would never lie about stuff like this, and weird stuff was always happening to him. I'll write it down as it happened to me, as I know the story and it's easier. Anyways, this is something that happened to me in 2006 on the night of France-Italy World Cup final. So I finished watching the match and I'm on my way walking home, and it's 3 a.m. I'm around 16 at the time, so I have some sense in not making things up in my head. I get home to my bedroom and my window is open and it's pretty cold, so I got up to close it. As I close the window, my right hand is still on the handle and I've turned around. In my doorway is an old man, around 80, with torn up clothes, and so is his skin. He isn't solid but more translucent. He's got holes in his skin and I can see muscle and bone, but it's all see-through. As my eyes saw him, I'm still holding the window handle and I freeze. I can't move, speak, or scream. Shitting myself as he's speaking to me directly into my mind. His voice is of an old man, deep and raspy. He's saying stuff about my whole family. He knows everyone's names, and he says all this horrible shit like he's going to kill everyone and do all sorts of shit to all of us. At some point, my dad's gone into the bathroom to do some morning prayers. As my dad flushes the toilet, the ghost, or as we call them, vanishes, and I collapse on the floor and just knock out by this time. It's been a couple of hours since I've been standing there paralyzed in this position. My dad comes into my room and asks what the fuck I'm doing on the floor. I got up and I just go to my bed scared shitless. So as I said, this didn't happen to me, but I'm pretty sure it's 100% true. It happened to my best friend. I've got stories of my own and I will share all in good time. Colebrook Devil's Road. One night, some friends invited me for a drink about 30 minutes away from where I live. I'm in a subtown not very close to other major cities. I head out to my friends like any other night, except I don't feel like drinking, seeing that my close cousin had died. It was nearly like any other night, although the moon was bright and there were no clouds in the sky. I drove onward through my town to my friend's house and had a few beers and watched them play beer pong. After a few hours, I was ready to head home, but I was still a bit sleepy from the late night half-drink stay, so I took the shortcut through Colebrook, or as we call it, Devil's Road. I make my way down the dirt road across the railroad tracks to the old chimney. passing by the first curve in the road only to come to a sliding halt. This thing, humanoid-like but not quite sure, comes up on the driver's side about 4 feet on all fours like a man crawling on hands and feet. It goes to the center of the road only to stop for about 3 seconds, which seemed like forever. I instantly became cold and nauseous. My breath stopped for a moment before my cousin uttered the words, "What the fuck is that?" I grabbed my pocket knife in fear and spoke, "I'm afraid," under my breath. About 4 seconds in, the thing stood up on 2 legs towering maybe 7 feet with a deep, bright light in the center. Although the light was not reflecting off anything, it was like the light was drawing inwards to the center of the creature, and it stood there for a few minutes, maybe 3 or 4, and just dropped to the ground and took off in a bluff on my right in a way I've never seen in humans, let alone animals. And it stopped. It stopped at the top of the bluff looking down at me, and that look is what made me fear this world. It was gone. It was Colebrook. My dad's ghost organist. My dad told me this story quite a few times, and I figured it might be well received here. I apologize for the vagueness, but I'm not in a position to get much more detail right now. He told me an incident that happened to him in his youth. He was around 17 years old, I think. He's in his late 50s, so this would have been around the early 1970s. At this time in his life, he was living with his uncle and their family. One night, for a laugh, him, his uncle, and a few mates decided to go ghost hunting. They lived near this cathedral, I don't remember which one in particular, which was well known for repeatedly being haunted. They went into this church with a tape recorder to see if they could record any ghostly noises. My dad said that they sat there for about an hour in pitch black, and he distinctly remembers hearing nothing. So after an hour, they get bored and walk off out of the church. Despite hearing nothing, they decided to play the tape just for gags. Here's the thing. Despite sitting in silence for half an hour, the tape had a very loud pipe organ playing music, which would have definitely been heard. After hearing this, they, in my dad's words, legged it and ran off. Another thing, I'm pretty sure I remember him saying that the church was on a steep hill and was either surrounded by or had a graveyard nearby. In any case, anyone wants to save me the job of locating the church, it's in England. The Linkin Park story. I once had an experience with my record player. 1 month ago, I was cleaning up my place while my wife and son were out shopping. I put in my Agents of Fortune album by Blue Oyster Cult and let it play, so halfway into the album I would go to my bedroom to clean it up there. Suddenly, In the End by Linkin Park starts to play. Now at first I didn't really pay attention to it until it finally dawned on me. I got up and stopped it, so I went and checked the needle, and the needle is halfway into the album, and no sound is coming out. So I lifted the needle and dropped it on again, and what do you know? It plays normal. This is an old school record player. It has nothing on it, not even a radio. I still can't explain how it managed to change songs when Agents of Fortune is the only album I own in vinyl. The Expressionless Man. Let me just start by saying, this would have never happened if I were to have followed the rules set by my parents. I am a 16-year-old male and have had many encounters with spirits, but never like this. I'm gonna cut straight to the chase. It was somewhere around 8:30 in the evening, so still rather early, but starting to lose a lot of daylight. I had been to this giant historic house inside my little town on the outside of Louisville, Kentucky many times, although my parents made it clear to me not to go there. I never saw anything besides snakes and spiders, so I never thought anything of it. My buddy and I were bored out of our minds, trying to figure out something to do. I mentioned the house to him and was jokingly telling him that it was haunted. He said no way, of course, being a non-believer in the paranormal. At this point, we were just looking for anything to do, so he said screw it and proceeded to the house. We parked back at the outlet mall about a half a mile from the house's location, put everything inside the car such as our wallets and everything important besides our phones, and my knife. We started our walk to the house and arrived quite quickly. We had to jump a gate in order to get up to the actual property. Once there, we immediately stepped into the house. No forced entry was involved. From the moment we walked into the house, I started to feel pressure and pure eeriness. There was nothing left of the house. The wallpaper had all been corroding for years and was falling off the walls. The house was slowly but surely decaying in itself. We moved further on into the house, looking around on the first floor. We saw nothing but absolute emptiness. My buddy Jay, as we'll refer him to the rest of the story, had started to feel the same way I had after entering the house. He said there was no way it had a ghost and just a figment of his imagination. To prove his point, Jay started yelling offensive things directly towards the spirits in the house. I honestly wasn't surprised that nothing happened. Like I said, I just told him that this place was haunted to get him to come. I never thought it really was. After a short period of time, we began to head upstairs. I told Jay that since he didn't believe in ghosts that he can go up first. Jay just laughed and said okay in a sarcastic demeanor. As we were walking up the stairs, we both started to hear what sounded like breathing. But not normal breathing, it was breathing that sounded almost cancerous. We both thought it was weird, but kinda let it go and continued up the stairs. We get stopped dead in our tracks almost at the top of the steps to realize that someone was coming up the stairs with us. But what weird was, we couldn't quite see them. Jay started to panic when he heard footsteps, and the papers that were left all along the steps rustled. Now Jay is rather a tough guy, not scared of much, but I knew I wasn't tripping when he took off faster than I have ever seen him run. I as sure hell didn't want to be left behind, so I left as well. I was surprised that I didn't trip or fall somewhere along the line, seeing as I rather ran fast down the stairs through the rubble just like Jay. As I ran, I kept looking back, and I quite can't explain this part. As I sprinted to get off the property, I saw a tall man peek out the entrance of the house. He was very pale and I couldn't quite make out his facial features. But I could see that he didn't seem to have eyes. The man looked clear as day, but something just wasn't right about him. When I caught up with Jay, he had said something that really caught my attention. "Connor, did you feel like you ran through something on the stairs?" My heart sank. When we were running down the stairs, I could feel a cold rush of air and pressure pass right through me at the base of the stairs, and I had thought nothing of it. There is no way I could ever explain the events that occurred last night. Every time I shut my eyes, I begin to think of the expressionless man staring at me wherever I am. Some pig. I grew up in a farm in Virginia. I had a pig in the barn that always acted in peculiar, almost human ways. One day early in the morning, I went out to the barn to start my chores and happened to look up. There it was. Written clearly in the spiderweb above the barn door were the words, "Some pig." Landlord of a haunted house. I live on the grounds of a very old house and rent out 2 studio apartments on the 2nd floor. Always I had rented to various strangers, so if there were noises coming from one studio apartment, a tenant would assume the other tenant was responsible for the noises. One day, I rented out one apartment to a young woman, and her boyfriend ended up renting the other apartment. One evening, when they were both in her apartment having supper, they heard loud noises coming from his apartment. Doors slamming, footsteps, drawers banging, yet there was no one in his apartment. When they later got married and moved away, I rented to a young man who lived up there for a year or so. When he moved away, he told me that one day he got a phone call from a friend who said he was going to stop by for a visit. A few minutes later, when he heard footsteps on the stairs, he opened his door to greet his friend, only to find no one there. Since then, I've often heard someone coming up the stairs and no one was there, but they were on the opposite side of the house from where the stairs were located. When we remodeled, we found where the original staircase was located. It was there on the other side of the house. Then I had a new tenant move in, and he angrily banged on my door the next morning. "You didn't tell me there was a baby living in the apartment next door. That baby cried the entire night." The tenant in the other apartment, first of all, did not have a baby, and second of all, was gone for spring break. Since then, all has been quiet, and once, when a deep psychic friend came to visit me, he told me, "There's a woman sitting on your front porch," and when I went to see who he was talking about, he said, "Not a physical woman, a spirit woman. She says she's here to protect the house." And so my house apparently has its own guardian spirit hanging out to look after things. Still, I've never met her myself. A magic puzzle book. This is going to be sort of difficult for me to explain. I'm 21 years old now, and every time I recount this story to anyone, I get laughed at and waved off. I was around 10 years old and my little sister was 9. My mom bought us these cheap little puzzle books from the dollar store. They were the same ones, the ones with crosswords and word searches and connect the numbers and things like that. Just a simple puzzle book. It was October and I'd been watching Halloween Town and other movies like that and decided after doing a few puzzles to see if I could get the pages to flutter and turn like they do in the movies. Like when you make it turn in a wave sort of thing. My sister did it too. We were doing all the same puzzles. We turned back to the page we were working on and all traces of any pencil markings were gone. There was no evidence that anything had ever even touched the page. It looked brand new. We were amazed. We fluttered the pages again and went back to it. Only some of the pencil markings were gone. We did this over and over and over again to see what else changed. The numbers were out of order and sometimes a page would be blank. Things like that. I know for a fact what I saw and I know it wasn't my imagination or anything like that. I've always been a big believer in the paranormal and things of that nature, and I've never been able to find out what exactly it was that was happening that day. Please, help me figure it out. Six graves. My grandparents' house is in an old mining town, Monument, Pennsylvania, and across from an open field. Their home used to be the doctor's home. I spent years refusing to go to the bathroom alone, if at all, because I was always too scared to walk past the spare bedroom. I'm not really sure what it was about that room. It terrified me, and sent me into a panic attack whenever I was near it. That room is also the setting of the recurring nightmare that I have, in which I look out the window to see my grandparents' front yard with 6 graves, each one having a woman with long brown hair and Native American animal-tie dress. The only thing I can remember actually witnessing in reference to that spare room is the sound of a rocking chair on the laminate floor starting suddenly one day. But I was already an adult when that happened. It was more about the feeling in and around the room. I would lay in bed trembling when I had to sleep in there as a child. It was in that room I began to worry the earth would run out of the graveyard space, and thinking about the layers of possible graves around us. I'm 37 years old now, but you couldn't pay me to spend a night in that room to this day. My house used to be a church. I lived in a haunted house for about 4 years. We were renting it. I'd always had a natural sense about the paranormal, and as soon as we went to see the house, I told my dad I thought it was haunted. Being a foolish 11-year-old, that made me want to move there more, and I begged for us to take it. It was insanely cheap for such a huge house. Cliché horror movie much? It gets better. And my dad decided to say yes. So I knew from the beginning in a way, but it wasn't until things really started happening that I was convinced. Voices from the attic, doors slamming and opening on their own, inanimate objects moving on their own. My dad saw a heavy box fly off a shelf at me on its own with no explanation. I started having weird dreams about a girl and her brother going to church in the house a long time ago. Then a few weeks later, we were told that the house was an old church that had been converted into a house. In the woods, there was an old cemetery. We also found out the family before us had left in the middle of the night without telling anyone, and they left most of their stuff behind. We had found tons of stuff in the basement, so that made sense. So at that point, I was pretty convinced. Things only got weirder, and we eventually left. My experiences with astral projection. There have only been 2 times that I can think of where I have astral projected. The first time I was about 8 or 9 years old, living in a quiet, rural region of eastern Ontario. I had just woken up after having the worst nightmare of my entire life to see my mother in the corner of the room, dressed in her black winter coat and looking at the wall in front of me. I closed my eyes and she disappeared. My second experience was what I can only describe as downright horrifying. This happened last month, and it took place during a night where I had insomnia. As I was trying to fall asleep, I closed my eyes for a period of 10 seconds. Feeling uncomfortable, I opened them. Still awake, I tried again. I closed my eyes, but this time it wasn't as eventful. When I opened them again for about 10 seconds, I saw my doorknob slowly start to turn. Then all of a sudden, it opened extremely fast, and to my utmost surprise and terror, a disfigured and demonic version of my mother sprinted into the room. As I fell to the ground out of sheer shock, she ran to the base of my bed and out of view. I couldn't look at her because I was on the ground and I was paralyzed. I felt the most extremely intense sense of vibration and pins and needles. Then I woke up and quickly checked around my room looking for that satanic beast. To my relief, there was, of course, nothing there. My question is, why did both of these experiences have such a close link to my mother, and why did I get the most incredible sense of nostalgia when I saw that demented beast? Something lived in my closet. Something lived in my closet when I was a child, and we lived in our old house. The house wasn't that old, built in the 1950s, but a lot of bizarre things happened there. My mom experienced most of them because she stayed at home to watch toddler me and my infant brother, while my dad worked long hours. But the one experience I remember was the thing in the closet. I'd often wake up in the middle of the night and think I'd see something sitting in a pile of clothes in the open closet door. This happened several times when it then accumulated into one terrifying night. Once again, I woke to see something shifting back and forth in my closet. I couldn't see the thing, but I saw my clothes moving. I turned over to face the other direction and pulled the covers over my head, still trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. That's when I heard the most horrible growl ever. It was like a cross between a dog's growl and a woman's shriek. And then something hit me in the middle of my back. I screamed as loud as I could, and my mom came rushing in. Of course, she checked the closet, under the bed, and all around, but there was nothing besides clothes and toys. I spent the night with her in her bed, and she told me years later, the next morning I had a huge welt in the center of my back. That was the only memory I have of that house, and I can't recollect if I ever saw that thing again or not. But my mom has had some chilling experiences too. Really weird things too, not things you hear about in your average haunting. Makes me wonder, what the hell could be wrong with that house or plot of land for such bizarre things to occur? Demon on top of me. So, this is my first post, so please forgive me if I do something wrong. I live around the Kentucky area, and when I was around 4, I lived in this house. It was pretty old from what I know, and I lived there till I was about 7. But my mom would take me to bed and sing me to sleep, but after I fell asleep, she would go back into the living room. There was a thing that would get on top of me every night, and I remember it plain as day. It was a black, misty person, like a skeleton, and it would take its arms and shake me. It would shake me to death, and it knew my name. It would say my name. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. It would do this for like 3 minutes. It would finally leave, and I would get up and open the door, and I would be crying my eyes out, and my mom would wonder why I was crying and take me back to bed. It did this almost every night to me, never to my mom or anyone else. I eventually moved out, and I never experienced anything else paranormal. I'm 15 now, but I do have a fascination with researching paranormal things, but I, to this day, still have no clue what it was. Please help. Childhood experience with a static man. Before I start this, I think it's advised to take this with a grain of salt. Although I swear, I'm not telling a single lie about what I saw. It must be taken into an account that I was only 6 years old back then, and my imagination was very, very wild, especially after I had been listening to my mom read me about paranormal and the like. Also, I apologize if I posted this somehow wrong. I'm still really new to this. Like I said, I was 6 years old when this happened. It was evening already, and my mom had just finished reading a child's book to me about magic and paranormal and things related. I was returning into my room when I saw a man in my room, or rather, what at least resembled a man. The creature was tall, probably around 180 centimeters, and reminded me of a shadow in a way that it didn't look three-dimensional. It was in an orangish color, and it looked like it was like a hologram of sort, with the image being static and uneven. If you've ever seen any movies with really bad, almost fading holograms of people, you might know what I mean. The creature was standing in front of my closet, which had a mirror on the top of them, and it looked like it was searching for something. Of course, with my brain of a 6-year-old, I first froze still and then immediately dashed off to my mom. telling her that there was a weird, static creature in my room. Naturally, after having read the paranormal book for me and all, she just brushed it off as my imagination, and admittedly, I believed so too. I was a kid, but I was very skeptical about things and wanted to find a logical explanation to everything before claiming something paranormal was going on. I calmed down and returned back to my empty room, but I was still a little scared and decided to hide under my table for some time to calm down. There was a long tablecloth over the table, completely blocking my view as I sat under the table. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 5 minutes or so, before I decided it was probably safe to go out. I moved the tablecloth slowly and peeked from behind it. Just then, to see a static leg right in front of me. The creature was again there, where it had been standing previously, and I fast pulled the tablecloth back and tried to cover my mouth so I wouldn't scream and bring attention to myself. Eventually, my nerves got the better of me and I stormed right off to my mom, scared as hell and hesitant to return to my room for some time. I've never seen the static man after that, although I've seen other things and experienced even more. I feel like this thing I experienced as a child was so far the most bizarre of them. As a side note, after that incident, weird things started happening at my home, things falling down on their own, doors opening, and so on. I swear, I once saw something looking for me from behind one door when I was alone home, but it all eventually ended when our old sauna room was redone. The empty carriage. About 15 years ago, a friend and I were walking to her house in the middle of the night. To get to her house, we took a shortcut through an old abandoned playground. It was surrounded by deep hills and tall trees, very creepy even during the day. Anyways, we get there and we see an old antique looking carriage. You know, the ones you saw back in the 1940s. It was being pulled by a horse and it was circling the walkway that surrounded the entire playground. My friend and I stopped and we were talking back and forth about what we were seeing. We couldn't tell if there was anyone inside, but we could see that there wasn't anyone guiding the horse. We're trying to make sense of all of this when it suddenly stops, turns towards us, like it sees us, and takes off in our direction. We screamed, turned, and ran. We stopped once I realized that nothing was chasing us. To this day, we're not sure what it was, and we never took that shortcut ever again. Grandpa texted us from the dead. First time posting here. Please forgive me if you think the story is really stupid. My grandpa had died a horrible death, which me and my entire family took very poorly. My aunt was a bit batty and also took it very badly, and I don't blame her. 1 year later, on the day of the anniversary of his death, my aunt got a text. "I'm coming over now." Everyone got the spooks and we mostly blamed it on some kind of shitty cell phone company sending texts years after they were meant to be sent. But what took me by surprise was his cell had been disconnected. This wasn't his typing style, and if it was a mistake from the cell company, why was it sent on that day? My aunt could not recall any context in which my grandpa sending "I'm coming over now" would be necessary. Thanks for reading. I don't have any photo evidence, but I am willing to answer any questions. The Preacher. Okay, before I get into the story, I want to make a point of saying that I am a skeptic. I do want to believe in ghosts, but I always look to explain it scientifically. Anyways, about 4 years ago, I was at my girlfriend's house, laying on the couch watching TV with her. At her feet is the hallway that leads to her brothers, and her mom's room, with the latter being the only door on the right side off the hall. The TV is to the left, directly before the hallway starts, so we can see down the hall while watching TV. While we're watching, I see a shadow hand wrap around her mom's room doorframe. I could see each finger individually close around it, so I knew that it was a hand. Then I saw a leg appear from the foot to just above the knees step out, then a torso, and then a head peek out, then duck back in. It moved just like a person, even when it left. First, the head and torso leaned in, then the leg stepped back in, then the hand slides off the frame. I could see details about the shadow person too. He had a receding hairline, a beard, and wore tennis shoes. It didn't scare me either. It acted like a dad checking up on his sleeping kid, just making sure they were okay. Basically, my girlfriend and I were the only people in the house at that time. Later, I found out that the house used to belong to a preacher who worked at the church at the end of the street. He had died in the house of a heart attack. I'd really like an explanation for this if anyone can offer one, and I'll answer any questions. Eyes water. Hey guys, I've been watching a lot of ghost shows and I was wondering if anyone could explain why, whenever they capture evidence, my eyes water and burn. I don't feel sad or anything, but I basically start crying. Anyone else have this issue or know why or how I can stop it? Thank you. Something in the water. First time, long time. Note, this is a second-hand account. It was Christmas Eve, or Thanksgiving Eve. It was a long time ago, okay? 1998. I was in college in Wellington, North California. For those that don't know, Wellington is on the coast. I lived in a really shitty apartment with a roommate who was born and raised in North California. For brevity, he was and is a redneck. The day after this event took place, I came home and the first thing he said to me was, "Are there water ghosts?" I was like, what? Oh yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention, my roommate was not a paranormal guy. Our friend from high school, who went on to become a scholarship wrestler, once woke up to a specter of a little boy standing in his doorway and screamed so loud his parents ran to his bedroom with a fucking gun. And my roommate would not let our friend live it down. So my roommate, who didn't believe in ghosts, asked me if there are such things as water ghosts. He then told me the story from the night before. My buddy Matt and I were drinking here and got bored around midnight, so we decided to drive into Wrightsville Beach. We parked right at the beach and walked down to the ocean. It wasn't cold, but it was foggy. We sat down on the sand by the pier and cracked a beer. It was around 2 a.m. As we're watching the waves, all of a sudden, I see a surfer. I can't really see, but it's on top of the water, and what else could it be? I remember thinking, that guy is fucking crazy to be surfing right now. All of a sudden, though, the thing starts zigzagging towards the shore, fast, and it's cutting through the fog, and I realize it's not a surfer, and it's going way too fast through the water to be an animal or fish. It was like it was floating and coming out of the water for us. Right about this time, I say to Matt, "Do you see that?" And he's already jumping up to run away. I get up real quick and I put my hand on his shoulder to balance myself, and he throws my arm off and takes off for the truck. We book it back to the truck and haul ass. I dropped him off and we didn't talk about it. I have no idea what it was. As soon as my roommate finished his story, I called Matt and asked him to tell me what happened the night before. Their stories were identical, down to the throwing my roommate's hand off his shoulder. I asked them if they could have been an alligator or a bird because that's what their story made me think of, but they both said there was no way. Yes, my friends could have been concocted the story, but I don't believe they did. Yes, my friends could have been drunk. I actually bet money that they were. But I think they did see something that night, out in the water. I know this story is not exactly juicy, but I'm sharing it to find out if anyone else has ever experienced anything like it. And so people will be scared of the nighttime ocean. Kidding. Sharing so people are aware of it. Farewell visit. When I was about 10, in the early 1970s, I woke up one early morning, around 5 a.m., judging by the light coming from the window. The weird thing was, I was instantly wide awake, which I only realized later, and when I glanced to my right, towards the closet, I saw a little girl, about 7 or 8, standing there, staring at me. She wore a purple dress with a white belt. Like how the girls in the Brady Bunch dressed, she was translucent, and her face was blurred out with just 2 black holes for eyes. I tried to scream for my mom or my brother in the bed to my left, but I was absolutely frozen in terror. The girl started to disappear from the legs up. It took about 15 to 30 seconds as best as I can recall, and at the end, only her long black hair was left. Really weird. When she was completely gone, I jumped out of bed and ran into my bathroom to my mom. I frantically told her what I saw, but I was in a panic, so she got me calmed down, and then I told her everything I was able to tell her. Of course, she told me I was having a bad dream and everything would be okay. After getting to eat a hearty breakfast with my dad, everything was okay. As I was thinking about the apparition over the following days, I remembered something from about a year before. My brother's friends and their parents had come over to socialize, and we boys, about 7 or 8 of us, set about playing army. We went into our bedroom and used the spaces between the 3 beds in the rooms as trenches to shoot at the imaginary enemy in the direction of the closet. Lots of fun. There was one girl present, the younger sister of one of my brother's friends. She stood by the closet watching us play. To us boys, she was invisible. Who needs a girl in war? At one point in the fun, I felt sorry for her because she wasn't able to join in. I stopped shooting and just looked at her, feeling a little bad, and caught her eye. For a few seconds, we looked at each other, and I sensed that she knew what I was feeling. A short while later, we found out that the girl had a brain tumor, from which she passed away maybe a week or so prior to the morning I saw the apparition. My parents had just gone to the funeral several days before that morning. I realized that the apparition was standing in the exact spot where the girl and I had made eye contact. When I asked my mom, what was Mickey wearing at the funeral, my mom instantly looked away and said, with haste, something along the lines of, I don't really remember. It was so sad, I wasn't really paying attention to that. But at that moment, I knew what Mickey was wearing. My mom never spoke of it again. But often, when something came up in family conversations along the lines of spirits or the afterlife, I noticed her looking at me with a curious expression. I've often wondered if Mickey paid me a visit on her way to the afterlife for that moment when she knew I had felt empathy for her. We weren't friends, as she was a girl 2 or 3 years younger than me, so I can think of no other reason why'd she come to see me. It had to be her. Right? Voices right before I fall asleep. Sometimes, right before I'm falling asleep, I can hear voices saying random little words or names, or combinations of words that don't really make sense. Really, all kinds of things. One night as I'm falling asleep, I start to hear the voices, and And usually this means that I'm getting really close to being completely sound asleep, and I start to drift off. The voices used to creep me out, but as I got older, I figured it was just my subconscious lulling me to sleep. But on this night, it was different. I was almost sound asleep when I heard a whisper so close to my ear it woke me up, and I jumped out of bed. It was almost as if I could feel the breath of the whisper on my ear. All it said was, "Oh, lighten up, Grace," which is not all that creepy and not my name. But this one was different from all the other voices I used to hear. Fully awake and a little freaked out, I started looking at my phone, thinking social media would calm me down. When I realized my phone is about to die, and I left my charger downstairs, and there was no way in hell I was going down there now. So I decided that I would just play with my phone until I fell asleep or it died, whichever came first. But I was so wired at this point that I didn't think I could fall asleep for hours. Something really weird happened right before my phone died. I can't explain it. The little message box that pops up to tell you that you've got 1% battery left popped up, but instead of saying what it usually says, "You have 1% battery, please connect your charger," the message box just said, "Grace Fuller." And then my phone died less than half a second after this message popped up. I didn't understand it, and by this time I had almost completely forgotten about the whisper, but immediately remembered after my phone had put out and left me utterly alone in the dark with my creepy feeling. So I just lay there now, wide awake, staring at the wall because I had psyched myself out so much. I don't know how much time passed, but finally, I fell asleep. And I know I didn't imagine this, but as I fell asleep, I heard a different whisper. One that was more familiar and quiet. I swear it said, "Good night, Grace." Again, that's not my name. Letchworth Village Story. Letchworth Village is an abandoned mental institution that's a pretty close drive from where I live. There was a guy in my group of friends who was obsessed with the place. Obsessed. He would drive up by himself, constantly pester us all to go up there, and talk about it regularly, etc. I've done my fair share of exploring abandoned areas when I was much younger at this time. I was about 22. I was over it. I'm just too cool for school, you see. The guy eventually convinced 3 friends, myself and the guy I was dating at the time, to come up and drive there and check the place out. It was a crummy abandoned mental institution. Surprise, he kept warning us that we were trespassing and to look out for any of the security guards that patrolled the grounds in their pickup trucks. It was dusk as we wandered around, but nothing about the place creeped me out. I sat on some swings that looked like they were going to collapse at any moment and chatted with one of my friends, who then proceeded to tell me that Letchworth is supposedly haunted, and that people regularly see orbs and apparitions during their visits. I rolled my eyes. Every abandoned mental institution is supposedly haunted. It's just something that people say to spook themselves out as they trespass and drink beer in abandoned buildings. Obviously, I'm very much interested in the paranormal and have been for a very long time, but I just found this whole spooky haunted abandoned mental asylum thing to be a little too cliche. We walked around, chatted, joked, and what have you. I have to admit the grounds were very interesting. We even found the remnants of the institution's old graveyard. When we came upon a building, everyone else was amped to go inside and explore. I was not. There was debris everywhere and it was dark at this point. I have a terrible sense of balance and horrifically bad night vision. I knew going in there was gonna be a bad time. My boyfriend at the time began to taunt me, asking me, "Are you afraid of ghosts?" She's afraid of seeing a ghost, you guys, and I was like, oh no, I just know I'm gonna trip in the dark and impale myself on a piece of rubber or something, so shut the fuck up, please. I'm 1,000 times more afraid of running into a homeless man on meth who is squatting in there, who will then freak the fuck out because we just invaded his home, than the idea of running into a fucking ghost. The rest of the group was pretty much like me. Fine, then stay out there. When the guy who invited us up there in the first place hissed. Shit, I just saw 2 headlights. It's the security guards. Run, hide. I looked and, lo and behold, I can see through the trees that there were 2 circular lights getting closer. We bolt and end up crouched down in some bushes. Where are the lights? We think the trucks must have taken it down the dirt road and were away from us, and we relaxed. Nope, there the lights are again, but this time from a completely different direction. The fuck? Maybe these are 2 security trucks driving around. That sucks. We scurry through the bush, trying to keep low and somehow quiet despite all the noises we were making, crunching on leaves and the like. The lights had been much closer that time. It seemed like pure luck they hadn't seen us. It was also very weird that they hadn't caught us yet. The group stops, all crouched down, as we look around to catch sight of the headlights that really should have been visible by now. No headlights. We decided to make a run for it back to the car, even though we're afraid we're going to see 2 security guards sternly standing by the vehicle, ready to write us up for trespassing. Thank God, we didn't see or pass a single security truck the whole way back to the car, and there were no stern security guards to meet us back at the parking spot. We all hop into the car and drive as quickly as we could out of Letchworth Village. It wasn't until we'd been on the road for about 15 minutes when one of my friends says, "Did anyone actually hear the sounds of the truck engines?" The inside of the car is dead silent as we exchange looks, and all admit, no, we've never heard the sounds of tires or engines whenever we'd see the lights. This was incredibly strange since the second time we'd seen them. They'd been rather close. Definitely close enough to hear pickup truck sounds. I'm pretty sure we all just laughed it off as our nerves getting the better of us and changed the topic. I'm not dating that guy anymore, and I've fallen out of touch with the people I'd gone to Letchworth Village. But I wish I could ask them if they think that maybe we mistook those notorious orbs that are known to be seen at night, floating around the grounds for normal headlights. Years later, I found out Ghost Adventures visited Letchworth Village and investigated the site. I've still yet to see it. The place just creeps me out now. Satana in the hospital. Psychiatric registered nurse here. I worked at a place that was haunted. It was an old hospital prior to being converted into a psychiatric hospital. A place where surgeries were performed and, presumably, a place where patients died. I received phone calls from the police during night shifts once in a while, stating that they'd received calls from a little girl, and that the calls were coming from our hospital. They were able to give me the extension number of the line, and it turned out that the calls were being made from the arts and crafts room. Nobody goes there at night. Ever. As supervisor, I knew where my staff was at all times, and there was never a need for anyone to go in there at night. No patients could possibly have been able to be there, and there were several locks they'd have to get through first. Also, night shift staffing was minimal, and we were a small 35-bed hospital, so there were really only 6 or 7 of us on any given night. The little girl that would call identified herself as Satana. According to the police, she would call and ask for help and then hang up. Fucking freaky deaky stuff. Lots of other shit happened there at night, but This was the most chilling. Untold childhood horror. When I was about 7 years old, I went through something that to this day scares the shit out of me just thinking about it. That night was seemingly an ordinary night. My mom had put me to bed as usual and I was in a generally good mood. After lying in bed for roughly 10 minutes, a pitch-black humanoid crawled into my bedroom and climbed up my open bedroom door. I was too terrified to yell for my parents, so I just laid there in horror. After about 3 seconds of the thing being stuck to my door, it rotated its head 180 degrees to look at me. Although it did not have any eyes, it vanished without a trace seconds later. I thought it was over, until it lowered its head down from the top bunk, just 2 feet away from where I was lying down. At this point, I screamed for my mother and the figure hoisted itself back up to the top bunk. My mother was in the room within 10 seconds and turned on the light. The creature was nowhere in sight. She asked me what was wrong. I was hysterical. All I could manage to say was that I didn't know. She told me that I just had a bad dream and told me to go back to sleep, which I did after hours of laying in bed in terror. My first thought upon looking into it was this was a shadow person. However, it wasn't anything close to a shadow. It seemed to be completely solid and pitch black. I guess that's why I'm writing this, to figure out what it was. Does anyone have any insight? Red and black. This is a story that my mom told us when we first moved to Texas. After my mom had me, my parents moved to Spring, Texas into a new house. The house was set up to where my parents' room was down the hall and they could look down it to see my room. The first night they were in the house, my mom woke up terrified. She wasn't able to move, and when she looked down the hallway, she saw a black figure moving around the hallway. She tried to get up, but she couldn't move, so she woke up my dad. Now, my dad doesn't believe in the paranormal at this point, so he wakes up groggy and mad that she woke him up and I'd been sick and he was exhausted. She told him there was someone in the house. So of course dad goes into I'm gonna kill this guy mode and starts looking. As my dad gets out of bed, the figure walked into my room. My mom loses it and screams at my dad to get me. Dad sprints down the hallway to find me fine in my bed and grabs me. As he is walking out of the room, the figure walked out behind him and then went through my dad. My dad tells me that he did feel a chill as he left the room. The figure came into the bedroom and stood at the foot of the bed. My mom keeps asking my dad, "Can you see him? Can you see him?" My dad is starting to get really pissed off because he can't help whatever is causing this to happen and wants to protect his family. This is the scary part. The figure moved to the side of the bed and sat down. He then opened his eyes. My mom said that they were a deep blood red. And then the thing smiled at her, and this black smoke came from its mouth. At that instant, the doorbell rang. My dad ran to the door, ready to kill whoever was outside. He tried to switch in the porch light, but it wasn't working, so my dad opens the door and sees another man. The man asked if everything was alright, as if he had seen what he thought someone go into the house. My dad said my mom was seeing things and that he didn't know what to do. The man at the door then said, "Everything is fine." At that moment, my dad heard my mom sigh a breath of relief and looked down the hallway to see my mom getting out of bed. When he turned around, the light had come back on and the man was gone along with the presence. This was when my dad believed in the paranormal. They are both convinced that the figure was some sort of demon and the man at the door was an angel. We moved out the next day. This story still scares the shit out of me, but I am fascinated with it even more. Ghost on movie set. This isn't particularly scary, but it is spooky and it definitely makes me believe that ghosts probably do exist. In 2007, I was working on the movie American Gangster. My job was to find locations to film. One location I needed was a Quonset hut, a large building with a curved roof, to use as a military hangar. After scouting for a few weeks, I found an armory in New Jersey. After working out the contracts and details, we had a small prep crew do some work the day before we had to actually film. The scene was a short one. If you saw the movie, it's towards the end, when they find drugs hidden in the caskets of soldiers returning from Vietnam. Anyways, our story was ending and everyone but myself, Tim, and the caretaker John were left. I was outside with John, and Tim was inside, making sure everything was ready for us to leave. While outside, the caretaker told me the armory was haunted. He said sometimes, I forget when, in the late 1800s, the building was partly used as a stable, and one day the caretaker there was accidentally trampled by a horse. He said the caretaker's name was Charlie. He mentioned that a few times a year, military would spend the night at the armory, and that more than a few times, these big and tough military guys would either leave the night to sleep somewhere else or just be really spooked out in the morning. They'd often hear blood-curdling screams, chains rattling, and the sound of horses right inside the barracks. As he was telling me the story, I just kind of smiled and nodded. I've met quite a few colorful characters in my job and wondered when Tim would come out so we could leave. A few minutes later, Tim came out and said everything looked great and we were ready to close up. But he mentioned that he almost bumped into a man upstairs walking in the hallway. He wasn't in our crew and he just assumed he worked there. John said that no one else is in the building. No one else was working that day. Tim just looked at him with a puzzled face. John then told him it was just Charlie, the ghost that haunts the armory. Then he told him the story of how he died there. Tim turned white as a ghost and looked at me, hoping we were just playing a trick on him. I told him we weren't. The next day, no one saw anything, but Tim was still a little freaked out. An unrelated ghost story involved another guy I worked with on a TV show. One night, I was watching one of those ghost story shows on TV, don't remember which one. All of a sudden, the guy I worked with, Lewis, appeared on the show. I was surprised, to say the least. We work in the same office, and he never mentioned to me he would be on TV. He told his story on the show that he was scouting an abandoned psychiatric ward in Staten Island. He was just there to look it over and take pictures. It was just him and the caretaker. While there, he ended up walking down a long hallway and he stopped to take some photos. At that moment, he said he felt the caretaker standing behind him and the lights started to dim. Then he felt the caretaker wrap his hands around his belly and give him a squeeze. Lewis turned around slowly, a little weirded out that this guy gave him a hug. When he turned, the lights got brighter and no one was behind him. He was in the middle of this long hallway all by himself. Shaken up, Lewis took the rest of his photos and hurried outside to meet the caretaker. The caretaker told him that he doesn't like going into that wing of the building because it's haunted. The next day at work, I asked Lewis why he didn't tell me that he was on the show. He said he didn't think we would believe him and He didn't want to be goofed on. My child predicted my pregnancy. Now, I'm not sure if this is the proper subreddit to post this on, but this happened a couple of months ago and has my husband and I questioning our beliefs. We're not religious people, never have been to church, and do not follow any sort of structured religion. Our daughter will be 2 in November and is exceptional when it comes to her ability to communicate. She even tells us things that we've never even exposed her to yet, like birth and where babies come from. On July 4th, we were visiting family and she randomly stood up from her toys, walked over to me, lifted my shirt and said, "Hi, baby," then walked back to her toys like nothing had happened. I was a bit stunned and asked my husband if he had taught her that. He said no, and then we went to ask her grandparents who were with us, and they also have never mentioned babies or the fact that they grow in women's bellies before. I tried to just laugh it off, thinking that she may have seen it on Sesame Street or a show like that. About 2 weeks later, I started feeling funky and tired. Mentioned it to my husband and decided that I should take a test. A big, fat, positive stared me right in the face. We were shocked to say the least. Our daughter had accurately predicted our pregnancy nearly at the same time as conception, and now she's always talking to the baby, calling her sister baby and saying that sister baby and her have been friends forever. We do not know the gender yet, but if it turns out to be a girl, I think I may actually lose it. Thanks for reading, and if anyone has experienced this with their kids or kids they know, I would be very interested in hearing your story. My child predicted my pregnancy. Update. As stated in my first post, my daughter had lovingly referred to the baby growing in my stomach since we found out as baby sister. We never tried to correct her, only let her know that it either can be a baby brother or baby sister, but she told us that it's a sister baby with red hair. She even took us by surprise and called the baby by the name we had picked out if it's a girl, Vivian. We never even told her the name, and we didn't even mention it around her. Turns out she was right, it is a sister baby, clear as day. We're still blown away by our little toddler. You will have to wait and see if baby Vivian has red hair though. If she does, I think we're going to try to contact someone similar to her, so either she can talk with someone who has similar gifts or learn from them. Thanks for your time and interest in our experience. It has changed our lives for the better. Creepy old lady. I have trouble sleeping in general, and which is always worsened when I'm sleeping in a strange place. So needless to say, I've been reading up creepy shit on Reddit the past few nights. So here is my creeper story of a weird old lady. Backstory. My parents' house is a known haunted place in my neighborhood, to the point that just before they bought it, my friend's mother and her friends walked around it just to see it during the open house. Most people that spend a lengthy amount of time there will have at least 1 or 2 stories. One night, my friends and I were bored since it was around 1 a.m., so there was really nothing to do. We decided to play with a Ouija board. We started inside the living room asking the ghost of the house questions, etc. I honestly don't remember specific questions or responses, but we asked about this particular spirit that seemed to haunt only the downstairs area, as this particular one was known to throw stuff and call out our names, my and my siblings' names, etc. Scary stuff in general. Well, after attempting to ask some stuff, the flames of the candles we were using grew very large, before they abruptly all blew out, even though no one had felt a draft. We freaked out and decided to play the board on the porch, minus the use of creepy-ass candles. One thing to know about the porch is there are very high bushes surrounding it, so if you're seated in the chairs, there is no way anyone can see your legs or your lap. So we're sitting on the porch playing the Ouija board on a table with me holding the planchette, seated nowhere near the said table. We haven't even begun playing it again, when out of nowhere, a very old woman was standing right in front of the bushes staring at us. Very creeped out, my friend timidly asked if we could just help her. She took a long look at all of us, scanning each of our faces, and then looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You aren't playing with a Ouija board, are you? You know that there are others in your house, don't you?" We all just looked at each other in horror, and I quickly dropped the planchette. I opened my mouth to respond, but the woman was no longer there. My house is a corner house, so we all jumped off the porch immediately to see if she had turned the corner, but no one was there. We ran up and down the street and around the corner trying to find her, to no avail. Never saw her before in my life, never saw her again after. She wasn't scary, just very creepy, and we all felt like she was looking out for us that night. Needless to say, we all slept at my friend's house that night, and it was the very last time any of us played with a Ouija board. My scariest experience. Growing up, I've always had paranormal experiences that range from knocking to seeing shadow people outside. But what took place at my friend's house was the worst experience ever. My friend took long business trips to LA, and he had me watch his house up in the foothills in Arizona. It was practically a mansion. Aside from all the activity, it was a really nice house with an above pool ground, but it was a house of horrors. The first experience occurred when I had a friend over and watch a movie with me. She told me midway through the movie, the lamp next to her was making a weird noise and it made her uncomfortable. She left shortly afterwards. I thought maybe it was my friend's late partner whom I was close to. I called out his name and demanded he give me a sign he was there. Nothing. I decided to go to bed, but took a shower first. Stupid me, I had shut off all the lights in the house before taking my shower. So when I was done in the bathroom, I shut the lights off and it was pitch black. Instead of leaving the light on and going back, I made my way to the guest bedroom and fell asleep. The next day, I woke up to my horror that all the lights in the house, including my room, were on. That's nothing. Something in the hall bathroom broke, so I would have to use the master bedroom's bath to clean up. That back area was so uncomfortable that it felt like you were trespassing. Later, a paranormal investigator said the same thing. I hated that area with a passion, and I made it a point to basically do a run, jump, get damp, and get the fuck out in less than 5 minutes. It was that bad. Later, my same friend who complained about the lamp took me out to dinner one night. We sat in the car talking when every single light in the house came on and started dimming. She was nearly in hysterics and I was freaking out, but I had to go inside because my car keys and my apartment keys were in the house. I get in, armed with a rock and a cell phone, and the lights stopped dimming, but nobody was inside. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night with my blankets completely off the bed, and I was cold as hell. I put them back on the bed and was about to fall asleep when I felt the blankets abruptly pulled off me. I turned to look and say what the fuck when the blanket, I shit you not, stood straight up over the bedlight and then tacked onto the wall. Then this hideous, god-awful demon face pulled the top portion down and snarled at me. I was screaming bloody murder and literally climbed the bedstand to get away from it. The blanket flew against me and I, in a panic, fell off the post and onto the bed. The face disappeared. Whenever it would storm, especially during monsoon season, phantom boots would walk the hallways. First time I heard it, I called a coworker in hysterics and she could hear the boots marching up and down over the phone. Another time it was relatively calm and was playing some dance music and getting my exercise in when somehow I got possessed. This was the one time I wished someone had video recorded what happened, but I was dancing to a remix of Sting's Never Coming Home, and at one point I started doing spins like a ballerina would. I'm a guy who's not fully in shape and have never had training to be a ballerina. They were such perfect spins that I was doing a full 180 in the air without stopping. I must have done about 30 spins like this in perfect sync. I cannot repeat this to this day. One day, at the advice of a psychic, I had saged the house. The back bedroom, the master bedroom. The smoke went completely black, and it would stay black no matter how many times I would go back there and sage it. My last experience was the scariest. The house was in the process of being sold, but I still had a key and I was told to go and get the rest of my things. I would leave things behind because I was his only house sitter and was there so often. This was in the daytime around 11 in the morning. My room was the first room to the left from the front door, so it would have been a quick in and out gig. However, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. Scared out of my wits, I decided to stand near the opening and see if I could see anything. I saw a shadow of a man along the wall, and it went past my door and around the corner. I heard the front door open and shut. I grabbed my bag and ran out. To this day, I still get the willies. A new family has moved in, and I always wonder if they have had any experiences since then. Ghost spooning me. Around 6 to 7 years ago, in a state of sleep paralysis and semi-astral state, I had something start spooning me. It was actually quite loving and non-sexual, and in my mind, I asked it, "Why are you hugging me so tightly?" And it responded back with, "Because it's the simple things," or something like that. It was actually quite a sweet and loving feeling, but I was going through a rough patch at the time when this happened and was on a downward spiral. Not long after this pleasant experience, I started to have scary experiences and believe that I had one or more negative entities attached to me. And it just made everything worse. I'm not saying this to scare you, but to let you know to be aware. Burn some sage, cleanse your house, and more importantly, take care of yourself. Take care of your physical and mental health, because when your spiritual defenses are weak, entities can latch onto you, and it's draining. Pearl, the cat. When I was a little girl, I was scared of being in my room at night. My dad told me that cats kept evil things away because cat eyes had special powers. We had a beautiful white cat named Pearl who slept with me every single night. And after my dad told me how cats protect you, I wasn't scared anymore because Pearl was with me. The night she passed away was heartbreaking, and I slept in my room without her, but I wasn't scared because I was filled with so much sadness. After a few nights, though, I started becoming very scared again. I remember one night was particularly bad, and I was quietly crying because I was so terrified. But then I saw a flash of white dart into my room. I looked towards a corner, and there was Pearl. She was so bright it lit up the dark corner. I stared at her for a second, and she curled up on the floor and looked at me. I felt so safe and comfortable that I easily fell asleep. She would come back occasionally when I needed her most. Now that just could have been a way for a child like me to cope with fear, but I've always felt in my heart that it was Pearl. I'm always back and forth with my belief in spirits and the afterlife, but I love animals so much. I've lost many beloved pets and it hurts so much. I like to think that if any living thing on Earth deserves a wonderful afterlife, it's our pets. I also like to think that animals that suffered in life get a chance to come back and live a wonderful life in a loving home. My dad in the bathroom. Well, I posted this once before, but I'll tell the story again. One night, about a month after my father passed, I was in bed, not quite awake, yet not asleep, and I saw my dad at the foot of my bed. I immediately said, "Dad, is that you?" He didn't respond, but just walked out into the hallway. I followed him and saw him go into the bathroom. Now here's the weird part. He starts washing his hands and I said, "Dad." He looked at me and smiled and then disappeared. I know people will say that I was dreaming, but I can't explain it. To this day, why I was in the hallway crying. I woke my wife up, and I thought it was strange. The next morning, she told me that after I woke her up, she went to look in the spare bathroom, and told me that the sink was wet. We hardly ever used that bathroom, and if we did, it would have been hours earlier. Can't explain it, but interesting and somewhat comforting. Weird, but yet peaceful paranormal experience. This isn't so much scary or anything, but most people think all paranormal activity has to be scary and evil, so I like sharing this experience. When I was about 8, my grandmother had passed away. She'd been very sick for a long time and we had known it had been coming. My grandmother was a second mom to me and my 3 brothers. She treated everybody with the most respect and could find good in anybody. But on to the reason why I'm posting this. When the entire family had dinner at what seemed to be the last time we would see my grandma, she said we should all say goodbye and hug and kiss just a little more than a usual goodbye. But my brother, being a difficult 4-year-old, refused. My grandma had passed away days later, with that actually being the last time we saw each other. Sure enough, about a week after the funeral, my brother woke up in the morning saying he had a dream about Grandma, dressed in all white, saying goodbye, and she loved him while she was downstairs and he stood from the balcony. What 4-year-old could make up a story like that? Till this day, it gives me the chills and makes me feel like my grandma will be here by my side for my whole life. The best dream I ever had. I had a dream of my good friend that committed suicide 2.5 years ago. It was the best dream I've ever had. I got to reconnect with him. My old good friend Alex committed suicide 2.5 years ago. We were in 10th grade, going on 11th. It was a month before school ended. I was visiting in Texas at the time. We had made plans and everything to hang out, but when I came back, he had committed suicide. It was horrible. I had just talked to him a few days before, and we would always text each other. We had the biggest crush on each other, but we never got to the point where we were actually dating, and it breaks my heart. But last night, I had a dream of him. We were at the beach walking and talking about a lot of things, just goofing off like always. I was so happy. So was he. We just enjoyed each other's time. It was great. Then a woman. She was like a shining angel. She was on the pier, shining ever so bright. She was calling him over for his time to go. I walked with him to her, then we hugged, and then he kissed me. It felt so real then. He said he'd see me again soon. He stood by her, waving to me, saying, "See you later." And then they just disappeared. And then I woke up. I'm starting to tear up right now as I write this, because I miss him so much. He was a good, loving person. That dream will stick with me. It was one of the best dreams I ever had.